Yes, good idea.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Anna Curtis. I'm a member of the Board of Trustees in FETE, and I'm the chair of the External Relations Committee. And today we're welcoming you to FETE'S fourth existential encounter. We have the pleasure to host Devang Vaidya lecture, Existential Encounter with him. So just to say a few words. Well, FETE, you know FETE already. I see familiar faces. Just a note for Istanbul conference in May 24th and 25th. Check it in our website. And check also the information regarding membership if you want to, to join us. The important thing for today, because we will have time for discussion, is that you can raise your hand by using the raise hand button, which you can find at the reactions menu at the bottom of the Zoom window. And we'll see it, either Devang or Gideon or me. And introduce you to FETE'S chair, Gideon Menda, to say hello.
Great. Thank you, Anna. And welcome, everybody. It's great seeing you here in our fourth event of the Existential Encounters. And thank you, Devang, for being here with us today. Just before you entered the room, we realized that Devang and I know each other for quite a long time from NSPC. So it's good being here with you today. And I wish us all a very interesting presentation and a wonderful evening.
Yeah, thank you. So, well, I'll say that Devang Vaidya is a person-centered existential therapist, supervisor, and lecturer based in London. His research interests include elaborating Rogers' theory in the context of Kierkegaard's existential philosophy, psychoanalysis, the arts, and contemporary critical thought. Devang, thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure, and thank you for inviting me. It's a lovely opportunity for me to talk about something that I've become more recently interested in, and so this is very much a work in progress. My ideas are still in formation, so I'm hoping that at the end of my presentation, there will be a round of question and answers and discussions and contributions that will help develop these ideas. I think that the material belongs to all of us as therapists who are interested in an existential view of human beings, as against a more objectified views that is biologically centered, or a more mechanistic account of people as though they are some form of automatons or machines, as some forms of therapies take that perspective. I have a fair amount of material to go through, so what I propose to do is that I'll just run through the material, and then if we can just hold the questions or comments or discussions until we get to the end of it. Would that be okay for everyone? Okay. So what I thought of doing today was just getting in the mood of this discussion by listening to a few minutes of Not I, the Beckett's short piece that I'm using as a springboard for today's discussion. So if it's okay, I can go straight into that. And this is like the towards the end of this particular performance by Billy Whitelaw, and then there is a minute or so of her commentary on what it was like for her to perform this piece. So if it's okay, I can get started with that.
Oh, would that be it? Somebody would tell how it was, how she was, and been. Yes, somebody would tell how it had been, how she lived on and on, guilty or not, on and on, to be 60. Somebody, what? 70? God, on and on, to be 70. Somebody she didn't know herself, would know she heard, then forgiven. God is love, tender mercies, new every morning, back in the field, April morning, pacing the grass, nothing but an arms, take it up there, get on from there, a few more. What? Not that, nothing to do with that, nothing she could tell. All right, nothing she could tell, so something else, think of something else. Oh, down there, sudden lunch. What? Not that either. All right, something else again. So on, hit on it in the end. Did everything keep on long enough? Then forgiven, back in the... What? Not that either. Nothing to do with that either. Nothing she could tell. All right, nothing she could tell, nothing she could think, nothing she could... What? Who? No! Hey! A tiny little thing, out before his time, God-forsaken hole, no love, spared that, speechless all her days, that's it, speechless, even to ourselves, never out loud, but not completely. Sometimes, sudden urge, once or twice a year, always winter, some strange reason, the long evenings, out of the darkness, sudden urge to tell. And rush out, stop the first she saw. Near the lavatory, start pouring it out. Steady stream of bad stuff. Half the vowels wrong. No one could follow. Till she saw the stairs she was getting. Then dive shame. Crawl back in. Once or twice a year. Always winter, some strange reason. The long hours of darkness. Now this, quicker and quicker. The word, the brain, flickering away like mad. Quick grabbing on. Nothing there. On someone else. Try someone else. And all the time something begging. Something in her begging. Begging it all to stop. Unanswered. Prayer unanswered. All unheard. Too faint. So on. Keep on. Trying, not knowing what she was trying, what to try, whole body like gone, just the mouth like maddened, so on, keep, what? The buzzing, yes, all the time the buzzing, the roar like falls in the skull, and the bee poking around, painless, so far, so on, keep on, trying, not knowing what she was, what? Who? No! She! What she was trying, what to try, no matter, keep on, hit on it in the end, then back. When we'd finished it, Beckett and I sat in a darkened room and watched it through, and when it was over, out of the darkness, just came one word from him. Miraculous.
Okay, so I hope you got a taste of what this performance may be about, and my sense on viewing it several times was a sense that every conversation that we have with anyone has a layer of this level of utterances, this level of expression that is sitting under some of the most rational discussions, or some of the most reasoned arguments or debates or discussions or stories that we hear. And this is particularly true, and I've become more sensitive to this in the context of the work that I do as a therapist, and this is something that I want to test out with you, whether you would agree with this or not, that when sometimes people are giving us a very reasoned, elaborate account of something, conceptualizing their difficulties in life, their problems, the way they think their problems are going to be solved, underneath it, there is very often a sense of desperation, a sense of a heaving, pulsing crisis that is something that is being articulated in ways that somehow or other is excessive. And this is the key word that I wanted to bring in here, the idea that there is a surplus to someone's experience that they are trying to share with you within the frame of the words that they are using. So if that's enough of a warm up for Beckett, I would like to go straight into this presentation. So I'll move into sharing my screen once again. So bear with me that a lot of my material is actually on the slide itself. So effectively, this is the outline of a presentation. I'll basically talk about what is not I all about, and I'm going to focus on the fact that it is a discharge. It's not quite so much of a recent account or story or something with a clear narrative, but it seems clear to me that it is basically a verbal linguistic discharge. And that it has its own significance to what we will discuss later. The second point I'll make is that this discharge of language is actually a spillage of affect. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what affect actually is. People tend to misconstrue or understand the affect as simply emotions or feelings. And I want to just suggest that what we are working with is a level of some kind of an experience at an embodied level, which has not yet formed itself into a construct of a named feeling. So the moment I say that I'm feeling angry, what has happened is that I've taken the raw material of an affect and put it into some kind of a mental framework where I think where I think about what that means, and then I think about anger, and then I bring the two together, and then I say I am angry. So to say that I am angry already is moving away from the affect and bringing it into something of a cognitive framework. What I'm talking about as a spillage is that the affect spills over into all of our cognitions and subjective interpretations of our own experience. And what that leads to is a sense of an uncanny otherness, something that is not I, that is inside me as an embodied experience, and that is something that I can actually have a relationship with. And that leads to my third point, which is that affect is simultaneously a lack and a surplus. And I'll go on to discuss as to how that paradox actually works. And I'll conclude that one way that we can think about working with people at an affective level is by draw upon the idea that our work essentially is one of love. And then I'll draw upon some thinkers to construe this notion of therapeutic love and talk about the two elements of these therapeutic love in terms of aspects of love and expressions of love. And I'll move now straight on to the next thing, the linguistic discharge, which is Beckett's not I. What's going on here? So Beckett's work, he calls it as a linguistic ejaculation, and it appeals to the nerves of the audience, not the intellect. And it does not even go to the level of basically any named emotions. All you have is a nervousness in motion. In composing a text that is difficult to learn, but for any actor, with countless repetitions and interjections to be spoken at such speed, his instruction, Beckett's instruction to the actress was, don't act. And he saw the actress' task as to speak so fast that you can't think, and think so fast that you can't speak, and yet speak she must. I think this is a very good summing up of what happens in therapy when we are listening to our clients. Next point is that the actress Jessica Tandy was the first actress who actually performed this part. When she was complaining that the running time of just 23 minutes was rendering the work unintelligible, Beckett telegraphed back his famous injunction, I'm not unduly concerned with intelligibility. I want the piece of work on the nerves. I want the piece to work on the nerves of the audience. It worked on the nerves of Billie Whitelaw, the actress, the British actress who did this work and whom we just saw. Not I, she says, came through the letterbox. I opened it, read it, and burst into tears, floods of tears. It had a tremendous emotional impact on me. I knew then that it had to go at a great speed. Blindfolded with a hood over her face, she suffered sensory deprivation. I went to pieces. I felt I had no body. I could not relate to where I was, and going at that speed, I was becoming very dizzy and felt like an astronaut tumbling into space. I swore to God I was falling. This is what it's like to enter this particular sphere in very dramatic circumstances. So note Beckett's point that I'm not unduly concerned with intelligibility. I want the piece of work on the nerves of the audience. So he's already attuned to the idea that human experience that is often expressed is its aim is not necessarily to make itself intelligible, but in some way it is simply a communication that works at the level of the nerves of the audience, or that when basically in a therapeutic context, when clients speak to us, they are attempting to at some level make themselves intelligible, but at another level they are trying to communicate something to us at a very different level. And this is Whitelaw's point. I went to pieces. I felt I had no body. I could not relate to where I was, and going at that speed, I was becoming very dizzy and felt like an astronaut tumbling into space. I swore to God I was falling. And I wonder how often therapists come close to feeling something like this when they're facing an avalanche of clients' verbal expressions. What is happening here with all these words? Each word is actually cracking open at every syllable, from which spills out something that is alive, and it is something that overwhelms the utterance. The words are utterances, but the spillage keeps them unspoken. This I will refer to as affect. Now, the idea of this level of communication is something that Beckett's worked in his other writings, and I'll just refer to two here. That in The Unnameable, this is what he gives one of his characters to say: no need of a mouth, the words are everywhere, inside me, outside me, I'm in words, made of words, others' words, what others, the place too, the air, the walls, the floor, the ceiling, etc., etc. You can read the rest, but the point he's making is something that we've already seen a while ago. And then, in contrast to that, note what he says in this earlier piece of writing called Malloy, in which he's saying, not one person in 100 knows how to be silent and listen. No, nor even to conceive what such a thing means. Yet only then can you detect, beyond the fatuous clamor, the silence of which the universe is made. I think this is something that speaks volumes, ironically, to us in terms of what exactly are we listening to, and what is our proper response that we can call a therapeutic response. Is my speed of speaking, is this okay for people? Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes, it's fine.
For a while, I thought I was the mouth just speaking out in a dark hall. Okay, so let's just quickly go to the second point, which is about the affective spillage and what I mean by the uncanny otherness. So my point here is that before we learn to think, before we speak, before we become an I, we are always and already in a state of being affected. Affect is precognitive, pre-subjective, pre-linguistic, and therefore it is the pre-personal. It is the not I, that is the not yet I, that is striving to surface in the consciousness of the I. It is a physiological state of the living organism that is in a continual process of becoming. And by that, I simply mean that these affective layers of our experiencing at a bodily and organismic level are striving to come into our conscious sense of I and becoming a part of its assimilated self-identity. I think this is not a million miles away, I think, from what Freud's famous dictum is, where it was, there I shall become. The task here can be construed as, where is this movement actually taking place? Is it something that the conscious mind is the conscious rational self, is it waiting to appropriate the affect into its own categories and making sense of it? Or is it prepared to surrender and go into the affective layer and allow itself to dissolve and be overtaken by this affective layer? So the general point here that's perhaps more familiar to people from a humanistic orientation is that human selfhood is neither an entity with entity-like properties that can be calculated, aggregated, or predicted. It is also not a creature. The human self is not a creature that survives on instincts and appetites alone. It is a continually emergent process of becoming. It is paradoxical. It begins as an organism and remains grounded in organismic experiencing throughout its existence. People familiar with Rorty's will recognize the human selfhood as comprising organismic experiencing and the self-concept or self-identity. Affect is present through all the layers of existence between the absolute pre-verbal stage and the fully formed linguistic self, but affect overflows in all expressions, pre-verbal, verbal, and non-verbal. So I'm going to just quickly talk about the term uncanny and retrieve it from its traditional psychoanalytic and philosophical context, which is basically Freud and Heidegger, and view that the uncanny is presented as simply a pre-reflective embodied response to the world. It emerges at an intuitive level, often in unsettling ways that are neither rational nor irrational. So the uncanny surplus of affect is expressed through speech, which is the utterances of the unspoken, are also expressed in terms of dreams, incompatible ideas, expressions of desires and feelings, behaviors, cognitive dissonance, and choices. Which means that at every layer of our experiencing, at every layer of our expressing ourselves, there is an underpinning of the affective layer of our existence. Now, here I want to pause and talk about a particular vignette that Adam Phillips gives. One of his patients, Adam Phillips, tells him one day that, don't you think Freud is rather overrated? And what he had meant to say was Freud. And that he blushed, the patient blushed. Embarrassment is a sign of access. In that moment, the patient had said both what he wanted to say and rather more than what he wanted to say. We try and cover our tracks by claiming we have said more than we mean, when in fact we have meant more than what we had wanted to say. And I think this is a very good illustration of what affect does in terms of its performance, how it acts into the communicative layer of our lives. So what do I mean when I say that affect is both a lack and also a surplus? So we desire what we lack. We desire what we lack. We lack something, we desire that, we want it. But what we lack is a surplus to ourselves, which means that when I don't have something that I desire, that is something that is not yet a part of myself because it is absent. So it is outside of the self, and then it is excessive to the self, and the self has to in some way relate to the surplus and accommodate it within its own frame. So I'm going to give you a little vignette from group therapy to give you an illustration of how this thing can work in reverse, in the sense that to go not from the affect to the behavior at the conscious level, but to go back from the conscious behavior back into what is happening at the affective level. So I'll just read out to you this particular story rather than put it up on the screen, that Tony is the life of the therapy group. His sense of humor has everyone in stitches. Even the therapists laugh at all his jokes. He's that funny. Everyone has come to expect his jokes, even in the middle of someone sharing something very vulnerable and sensitive. This was a long, ongoing therapy group in which people were allowed to participate at any time. There wasn't like a formal structuring of who should speak and who should not speak. It was a little informal in those in this respect. So everybody loves Tony. He's a funny guy. Now one day, as he's making jokes all the way through, the therapist stops him and says, "What's with all the jokes, Tony?" Tony reflects for a few seconds and says, "Actually, I want people to think that I'm a smart guy. As a kid, everybody called me dumb." So the therapist tells him, "Next time you have an impulse to crack a joke, instead of cracking a joke, see if you can just simply say to everybody, 'I'm smart, I'm not dumb.'" So for the next hour, in the middle of any other serious exchange that was going on in the group, people would hear Tony's voice coming out from the corner. And he would say, "Hey, everyone, I'm smart. Look at me. Don't ignore me. I'm smart." After that, the therapist suggested that he drop down deeper and use sounds also. That's when the full force of Tony's underlying affect came to the surface. He began to cringe and he began to squirm, and he started making sounds which were something like, "Oh, please God, somebody help me. I need you. Please don't ignore me. I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. Take note of me." So what is happening with Tony? What Tony lacks is an acknowledgement and recognition of his existence. Perhaps this is something that he had experienced in childhood. But this lack creates a hidden surplus to his behavior. His humor now has an excess of what he desires. What he lacks, what is not enough, overloads his sense of humor, and he becomes a funny guy. What is not enough for Tony is expressed in ways that make it more than enough for others. Tony's excessive humor compensates for his inability to overcome the lack of insufficient attention that he's received from others. So, to sum up, human selfhood is grounded in affectivity. The presubjective, precognitive, preconscious affect continually affects the self consciously. Thinking and speaking are not suddenly switched on. These are learned over time. An infant does not begin to walk, but begins to learn how to walk by turning over on its belly, slithering, creeping, crawling, standing upright, and then walking, and then beyond that to running, to dancing. Similarly, the use of language too develops in stages to express one's affective experiences, but it is never divorced from its affective surplus, which spills out in words, but also in other forms. So these other forms are, of course, dreams, slips of tongue. It could be consciously done through forms of art and other practices. So it is not, the affects expression is not restricted to just a linguistic discourse. Now, I'll quickly digress here for a while to talk about this particular ideas about how affect relates to the human selfhood from a person-centered point of view. So Carl Rogers kind of saw human selfhood as comprising organismic experiencing, that is the bodily affective experiencing, and the self-concept. The self-concept was the self-identity, the sense of self, this is who I am. So you could think in terms of the not I, or the not yet I, and the I. And the gap between the two results in incongruence. I'm experiencing something which is not yet part of myself. So there is a gap between the two, which he calls incongruence, that makes me vulnerable and anxious. Congruence between the affected organism and the self-concept is the therapeutic goal. So the work of a therapist is to bring about, to reduce the gap between the organismic experiencing and the self-concept, and that brings about congruence. That's the theory. So the therapist and client co-create an atmosphere of understanding and acceptance that fosters a capacity in the client to accept the present attitudes and emotions which have been viscerally and physiologically experienced. So here you see the description of affect, but which have never been recognized in consciousness. Now, this is where I disagree with Rogers. And what I propose is that the gap between the organism's affectivity and the self-concept can never be fully closed, that incongruence is affect-bound and that it is ontological. And what I mean by that is that it just goes with being human, whereas congruence is always situation-specific and context-bound. We may have moments of congruence. We may have moments wherein the affective experience and our self-concept and our thinking machine come together, but it is always finite, situation-specific and context-bound, and must be repeated from moment to moment, which is an impossible task. So affect results from and in ontological congruence. So it's a circularity there, that because we are ontologically incongruent, which means because the affective layer and the cognitive layer, the linguistic layer don't fully match up, affect will arise from there, and then it will also result in ontological incongruence. What it actually means is that there is a dichotomy between the subject and object. The observer is separated from the observed. And what that means is that my observing I is separated from what I observe as my affect. The self, that is the I, and the other, that is the not I. So I basically have an experience of an otherness within part of my own structure, wherein I can take some of my experiencing, which is not yet a part of me. The I is separated from me, or the not I. And the body and mind also remain split up. I think that Baker was right to some extent, that although people have argued that is one of the biggest error that Descartes made, there is a sense in which we can experience our body and mind functioning and relating as two different aspects. Organism is separated from identity, or the embodied feeling is separated from mental thinking. So the affect creates a paradox. It is a possibility for the self to become one with its affective not self, whilst also maintaining separateness to experience the two becoming one. I can therefore experience this whole cycle of how affect comes to surface, and how I assimilate it to some extent within my sense of self. Then there is a surplus, and I see that the flow of affect is continuing, and my sense of self, my I, cannot keep up with it. And my awareness of this, that I'm in a permanent state of incongruence, becomes then the best account of congruence that I can give for myself. How do I now anticipate bringing this understanding to my work as a therapist? Now, my view is here that the work of a therapist is best understood, or one of the ways of understanding it well is to understanding it as a work of love. Here, I essentially draw on the work of Kierkegaard. People who are familiar with Kierkegaard will know his very famous text, Works of Love. And it is from there that I'm drawing some of the ideas. And I'll talk about love in its two dimensions. One is in terms of aspects, and one is in terms of expressions, and I'll come to that presently. So therapeutic love fosters proper self-love in a person. So why love? And I think, and why Kierkegaard? It's because Kierkegaard offers the view that the way love functions is that it fosters love in another person. And then for Kierkegaard, love is always indexed to love of the other and love of oneself. For that, he draws on the New Testament and the dictum and the commandment to love thy neighbor as thyself. So for him, loving oneself is a precondition to love the other properly. But that means that our understanding of self-love also needs to be proper and to be distinguished from the kind of self-love that we conventionally, typically come across in terms of selfishness, self-centeredness, having our preferences and then denying everything that doesn't really fit into our worldview. So therapeutic love fosters proper self-love in a person, and that simply means a full acceptance of oneself, the I and the not I. The idea behind that kind of self-acceptance is that it basically humbles me. It humbles me to not make tall claims as though I'm in full possession of knowing who I am. It is accepting that there is a lot that's going on that I can actually keep up with. And once I am humble and once I am able to accept the limits of my own ability to know myself, my claims to understand others, my claim to understand what is going on in the world are diluted. I become less definite, I become more receptive and more open. And anyone who is existential in their orientation will recognize that this is the fundamental idea about not knowing and the uncertainty which characterizes our lives. So congruence simply means acceptance of one's incongruence. Now, Kierkegaard says that the stronger the compelling, the less free the love. And what that means is that the idea of our offering therapeutic love in order to bring about some kind of a transformation of the self of the other who is able to accept and fully love themselves is something to be regulated by this principle that if there is any sense of compulsion, any kind of a didactic teaching, any kind of an instruction giving, any kind of a vociferous expectation that they do something like that, the capacity to love becomes less free. Then it simply becomes a rule that one has to follow. It loses its spontaneity. So I talked previously about the dimensions of therapeutic love in terms of aspects and in terms of expressions. And this is the overall map of what I mean by aspects. By aspects, I mean being with and being for. I'm drawing these two terms not so much from Sartre and the existentialists, but I'm going right back to Thomas Aquinas, whose understanding of love was in relation to God. And the view was that I love you means that I want to be with you and that I want the best for you. And wanting to be with you is being with, and wanting the best for the other, wanting what is good for the other is being for. And I regard that as the two aspects. I will come to some of the difficulties that we can face in operationalizing these two aspects, and then come to and then I'll speak about the expressions, which is how love can be expressed. And here I'm drawing upon two thinkers from a psychotherapy perspective. One is Donald Winnicott, and the other is Carl Rogers. Winnicott talks about holding and interpretation, and Rogers talks about unconditional positive regard and empathic understanding. So I'm pairing holding with unconditional positive regard, and I'm pairing interpretation with empathic understanding. And here is where I invite people's comments and contributions to see how they sit with this particular construction that I'm making. So what does being with and being for look like? Being with says simply, I want to be with you. But what is the risk of this? I want to be with you. The risk is one of encroaching, intruding, restricting the other, suffocating the other, dominating the other, manipulating and seducing. So under the guise of loving somebody and wanting to be with them, I'm actually fulfilling my own need of sticking to them and attaching myself to them and appropriating them into my own scheme of things. I mean, we are all familiar with people who create a nightmarish situation, who are always trying to be there and help us and be around us all the time, and that clearly is not love. So how do we meet this particular risk? Here, I think that the value that comes to the fore, the ethical value, why is respect for autonomy so significant, is because that it regulates our expression of love to be with someone by respecting the autonomy of the other. So we don't end up doing all the other things like encroaching, intruding, suffocating the other. And the other aspect of therapeutic love is being for. I want what is good for you. So I think that in addition to the previous risks that we've seen, we also have this additional risk of non-participation, aloofness, disinterest, and indifference. So out of a concern that I want what is good for you and I don't want to basically encroach upon you, I can stand so far back that I basically become disinterested. As though I say, well, it's your life. You're an autonomous person. I want what is good for you. You should do what you want. And that is like, I'm a therapist, I'm not the expert, I really don't have much to say, it's your choice, you can do whatever you like. Well, I think that that is also problematic. And what is the ethical value that is missing here? I think it is the one of care. That when we care for someone, we don't stand back, we take a risk. And here is a paradox again as to how do we bring together the aspect of respect, which is about offering distance and space to the other, and care by which we participate and we encounter the other person with our own self. Now, these expressions of therapeutic love, as I was talking about, they go in this in terms of holding and interpretation and unconditional positive regard and empathy. Kierkegaard's term, Winnicott's term, I keep thinking about Kierkegaard. Winnicott's term is holding. My simple translation of holding is simply suspending interpretation and simply being without encroachment, and unconditional acceptance of who they are as they are. And the interpretation aspect of it is acknowledgement of affect's presence in their lives as work in progress, its qualities of emergence, fluidity, experiencing prior to meaning, subjectivity, and verbal articulation. So let me just read that last bit again. It's experiencing prior to its meaning, subjectivity, and verbal articulation. So if you pair this with Rogers, I regard the holding aspect as being very, very synchronous with unconditional positive regard and non-judgmental prizing. It is holding in the sense of holding all of the person who is in front of us, including their I and their not I. And it is accepting it non-judgmentally and valuing it as part of themselves. And I think that here Kierkegaard's idea is really important because he talks about this whole picture of the human self as being given by God, as a very distinctive, unique self in front of us. God does not create everyone according to one template and then sprinkle all the differences on top of that. For Kierkegaard, everyone is distinctively human right from the core, in the very, very center of the being. They are distinctive. So it is remembering that, and then that is what guides our move to offer unconditional positive regard. And in terms of interpretation, which is a psychoanalytic term, I think the person-centered term that does a similar kind of work is one of empathic understanding, which is acknowledgement of affect's presence as work in progress and its qualities of emergence, fluidity, experiencing prior to meaning, subjectivity, and verbal articulation. What it means is that it is not the job of a therapist to take what is being expressed and to bring meaning to it. It is simply understanding that this is their experiencing as it is, and in some way reflecting back to them that they are having this experience, rather than trying to bring any specific meaning to it or what they ought to be doing with it. So this is the same picture in a pictorial form. And I think I'm now coming to the end of my presentation. But the final thought that I have on this is that when we are working with affect, the two principles that I like keeping in mind is to not push, but to not hold back either. And thank you for listening. So, okay, I did well with time. We have an hour and 15 minutes, so take it away. Unless people would like to have a few minutes break, because it was quite heady. But I'm here, and if you want to get started with raising your hand, then let's go.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, we've just been saying that if you could just raise your
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, there's no one else doing it, so please go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. Would you be willing to elaborate on the last point you made while working with affect? So you went through it rather briefly. Don't push and don't hold back. I'm curious if you can elaborate on that.
Okay, yes. So I
Thank
think
you.
when we are working at the level of affect, when we are working at that level of something that is that comes before, it's a kind of an experiencing that the client is having before they have been able to assimilate it as part of their own self. Uh, I, my view is that that it is not a layer to go heavy-handed with the agenda of trying to interpret the meaning of what they're saying or pushing them to go deeper into it. So I think, especially at that level of working, I think that we also encounter some very fragile processes and sometimes some very traumatic material. Think about not I and the mouth character who is articulating. That is a if that is the layer of experiencing that we are working with, it seems important to be very sensitive in terms of the pace at which we work. So it's not pushing them deeper. It is not forcing them to go there. It is to see what is emerging naturally. And that's what I mean by don't push. The whole idea about the work of, let's just say trauma, for instance, the idea that the work of a trauma therapist is to basically take the traumatic material and to integrate it into the self, I think has to be done very carefully. And then I think it needs to come under the momentum of the client's own process. And I think that that momentum is an organic process. It's not a cognitive process. So often a client will want to say, I want to work with my trauma. And often the therapist may have to say, yes, we can do that, but we have to be, we have to pace ourselves because we don't know the exact nature of the underlying force of that particular affect and how that might affect someone's life. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes, you have. And what did you mean by not holding back?
Oh, by not holding back, not being frightened, and not shying away from it. I mean, imagine a client whose speech begins to take aspects of what we saw in Not I. I mean, it can allow, not allow, but it can prompt in us all kinds of our own affective responses of fear, of disgust, of revulsion, of confusion, of our own bodily responses to something like that can be very, very powerful. So not holding back is, well, whilst listening to our own affects, that's one thing, but not being so frightened that we cannot meet it. I think we can talk to that part, we can engage with that part of someone's experiencing, but in a way that is also respectful, that it is not trying to take over and steer it in a particular direction.
Thank you.
Devang, I wanted to, to say what you said it very nicely, so I want to repeat it in order to understand it more. That incongruence is ontological, and I'm thinking that yes, there is always this process of becoming and the process for the not self to become a self, and it's through this through the affect, which is actually, as I understand it, and correct me in this, it is what connects us with others and with the world.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little more about that, Anna, as to how incongruence connects us to the world?
No, I'm saying that through what I understand, that through affect there is the process of the precognitive, as you said, pre-linguistic, that goes towards the formation of the self, let's say. But it is always a process. It is always I'm remembering Heraclitus right now, that was not saying know thyself, was always saying I'm looking for myself. I'm always seeking of myself.
That's very yeah.
And
Yeah, I think that's a point that I think that is perhaps not as well articulated by the affect theorists. Back in the mid-90s, there was what they call the affective turn, and for some reason, people thought that we had been missing out on paying attention to this layer of human experiencing. And that too much importance had been given to the linguistic turn, and that everything was like our world and our lives and ourselves are shaped by words and language, and that these thinkers began to say that no, hang on a second, I think that before we have language, we have affect. I don't particularly feel convinced that that was an original idea, but it was something that in the context of the development of philosophical ideas, it was a very significant move. So their view is quite often comes across as purely biological, that it's neurological, it's genetic. And I think that all those things are of course true, but I also feel that what you said, that this affective experience is actually it's relational. That the affects are not, they're not separate from the social surround in which the human being is even as an infant being raised, and also that it is seeking something from itself. It is seeking something from the outside, and its first outside is the self. The not I is seeking the I. But I think that if you allow that movement to carry forward, it would go out into the world. It is seeking the world. It wants to live. It really wants to live and exist in the world. And that it's to an extent, I think it's a stage where if it is denied validity, it can feel quite tormented. And I think that much of the kind of a despair or despondency or depression that people can feel sometimes, or anxiety, comes from those layers of experience not being given a chance to come out because of all kinds of reasons.
Thank you.
Sorry, as no one is speaking, can I make a comment?
Yeah, please do.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. It was refreshing and interesting. Your the shared information and the topics you mentioned reminded me this kind of a theory about selfing. I am a Gestalt therapist, and the theory in the Gestalt therapy, which I really like, and I was reminded by this, is called selfing. When a self happens, always, it's not a fixed part that I am this. It's always in the process of changing. And when you shared about this affect and the complexity of this process emerging during therapy, or the way it could be expressed or not expressed, it reminded me of this aspect of always changeable, always in kind of a fluid process, sometimes unconscious also, I guess that's how I understood, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong. Sometimes it could be also not fully articulated, not fully aware, but only felt, maybe through body or through the different layers of our total psyche, I guess. So that's how I understood it, which was very peculiar and interesting for me. And that's why this process of selfing is during therapy is like that. Always in a process, always, as Anna mentioned, always in the process, not even kind of fixed, or when you can pause it and look at it, it's always in a flow. And that was very interesting that I was reminded of these.
Yeah. Did you use the word selfing?
Selfing, yes, that's how they call sometimes.
Yeah.
The selfing as it's an active process. It's a dynamic process of being. But this self is also obviously understood in more Gestalt terms, or Gestalt therapy terms. It's when we become in contact with the environment. When I am, for example, talking to you, this myself happens this way. That now active part that is happening in this moment, that I'm in contact with you, and this whole process that is happening with me, it's also the part of self, but the dynamic part, which is happens only in the contact in this moment, here and now, because here and now is the topic of the Gestalt therapy for sure.
Yeah, very much, yes.
Yes. So what happens here and now, and I guess it makes sense as you were mentioning work during therapy, and this expression or the affect that is expressed during therapy is happens in contact with therapist, or maybe with someone else, but in this case with therapist, right? Someone who is in contact with. That's so.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some really excellent points. I think, thank you. Gestalt actually offers some very interesting terms and describes the process in terms of the 6 steps about what is it? Sensing, contacting.
Yes, it is the contact cycle of experience.
Right.
When during exactly what I said, we call it contact boundary, which happens on the boundary. For example, now me and with this amazing group that is now, I'm in we're meeting in the contact boundary, and this experience happens like I started talking, maybe like we go through the contact, and then it will end with the assimilation when I just withdraw and I sit, and that's it. It's just like a closure of that. So that's exactly how it is. Yes.
Yeah. Now, we can take this little vignette that you've given about your experience of being in this group, and
yes,
we can develop it a little further in terms of my getting in touch with how am I being affected by being here in front of this particular audience,
yes,
in the group, and then listening to you, the effect that your elaboration of this, the point from a Gestalt perspective, it's not just going into my head, it is also affecting me. It gives me like a bit of an assurance that yes, these ideas are actually, they have a ground, that the very humanistic and existential thoughts come together, a precise view that the self is not an entity.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it gives me great confidence, because I think my biggest worry and my biggest bugbear is that we say this at one level and then we go immediately as though we can put that aside and start doing all kinds of machinations with creating data, framing and or measuring or scaling things from 1 to 10, which actually goes against the view of the self that you've just described, right?
Exactly, it goes against totally.
So there's a real kind of a car crash that happens between these two views that we think we can just hold simultaneously, but I don't know what the validity of one of the views would have to get invalidated in objectification of self, right?
Maybe in some way they could coexist. I would like to be hopeful because all of the theories that exist, they have their own values. So maybe in a way there is a chance to coexist, and I would definitely hope for that. And as I brought a little bit Gestalt therapy and being myself as a Gestalt therapist, I would say this last sentence, which I think connects to this feeling and affect part of the experience, lose your mind and come to senses. It's this it's the sentence that came to my mind. Thank you so much. It was very nice to elaborate with all of these.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that just to come back to the point about how the two can coexist, I think that the real question here is that what kind of research methods, what kind of evidence actually we can think in terms of that.
As a humanistic therapist, you mean?
Yeah, that remains faithful to our understanding of this self as a selfing process and not as an entity. Yeah. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you.
So any other thoughts or comments or suggestions or something from your own experience, from your own work with clients that seems to either contradict or elaborate or confirm some of the things that we've discussed today? We'd lovely to hear.
Mercia, I think you unmuted yourself.
I would like to say something. Yeah. I thank you for the presentation. Very interesting. I'm a third year student on existential therapy with Alfred Langel and GLA, and I'm curious why did you choose Beckett and this play? I was it was very emotional for me to watch it. And what you was come first, the play, or you elaborated, or you used the play to explain your ideas, or you just stumble on the play and?
It's a very good question. I was expecting someone to ask me questions about Beckett, and I would have to say I'm not a Beckett scholar. I'm not familiar with all of his works. In fact, I'm not familiar with with him as an author in any serious way. But I saw Not I about 15, 20 years ago. And I thought that was something a bit like what you said, that I've not seen anything like this in my life. And I was thinking more from the point of view of the actor who was performing it as to, what would it have taken to do that? But the second thing that struck me was that particular performance is gripping, and it's not abstract. It seems like it has no story, and yet it is not abstract. And I like the fact that there is a character, but it's like unlike any other character that I had ever or that I have ever known. That there is no history to the character. There's no this character could be even without a gender or without any kind of a typical identity markers that we associate with being human. And I was just touched by something in the voice. It just seemed to me it's exactly what I wrote in the title of this thing. It just feels like that, like words crack open and something just pours out, something just spills out. And I think that somewhere I read that Beckett was very clear that every word should be pronounced clearly and every syllable should be pronounced clearly. And I think what that does is that from every sound that comes from every pronunciation of every syllable of every word, something oozes out. You feel something powerfully. And that idea, I one day, I hate talking in terms of one day I had this big epiphany, but one day I had this big epiphany that clients that I've sometimes found difficult to listen to, not because they were not intelligible, but because they were too intelligible. That their stories were like cast iron story with cause and effect, and it's like a perfectly formed alibi that confirms that there is something missing here. I was then reminded of that experience with Tony, because I was actually in that therapy group. And Tony is a superb guy. He's a musician, he's a singer, and he's done enormous amount of works on himself. But the sense of humor that had been going on and on and on in the groups for like 10 years, 15 years, that the moment he was asked to say, well, why all the jokes? And the instant, within a minute, he came up with this thing. He says, I just want people to know that I'm bright. I grew up poor. I grew up thinking that I'm just stupid. I grew up in a big family, 7 or 8 brothers and sisters. I just, and then how quickly from there he moved to, please don't leave me. Please look at me. And I think that is that abject level of experience that we all run away from. We do not dare to show that side. And I think that in therapy, when people get in touch with that part of themselves, something transforms in ways that is just, it's like, I am that. Or that is trying to be me, and I'm fighting it. So I think that this depiction of not I, this very powerful mirror, it's like a call, someone saying, own me, take me in, take me inside you. And I think that if I may use your question as an opportunity to say a little bit more about this, I think that this is a perfect exemplification of a political revolution. And what I mean by that is that within us, there are all this constituents who are waiting for some human rights. And there is, and I recognize in myself the dictator, the tyrant who will silence certain voices because they don't give me anything. They don't bring me money, they don't bring me status, they don't bring me pleasure. So I suppress them, I use them. They're like the slaves, I use their energy. And then when I see something like this, like the heart breaks open. Like, what am I? If I'm prepared to do this to myself, I can do anything to anybody because I'm already doing this to myself. So I think that's the moment that I think that a proper sense of how much I don't love myself comes to the surface. How much I am at war with myself. This internal subjugation that happens is diabolical. So I really like to think that it's political, but it's political at a very, very personal level. So, and I think the mouth, the dramatization of that whole thing. Yeah. That's a great question. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, because I was interested about the emotions of it. Or it's very emotional. And as you said, explaining, it's like where sometimes we subjugate our emotions. We don't let them fully develop. We control them, and it's like
yeah. Something that I've become very aware of recently, even more so, is that how much people feel that they need to do what they're good at, what brings them success. Do that which I'm good at. Play the drums because I'm good at it. Don't play the piano because I'm not good at it. But then don't ask themselves the question, and I don't ask myself the question that what would I love to do? I would love to play the piano, but I'd do it so badly that I don't try. And I'd love to sing, but I'm so not good at it that so it's this thing that what I'm good at may not be something that I love. I may be good at something because I've just been forced into doing something. I may be very good at this, that, and the other. So what? So giving permission.
Thank you.
Thank you for this last words. It enormously helped me to reconnect with my recent client. That exactly this topic was it. And thank you for these last sentences you said. Definitely.
Yeah, been doing what we are good at and what
yes, exactly that one. When there's a pressure that we must do something that we're good at, so that we cultivate the positive self-image. Without positive self-image, then as if I'm nothing, I don't exist. So this lack of existence, because I may not do something that I'm not good at, is something that is the focus of the therapy with what I'm working on right now. So helped me a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, great. No, I'm pleased to hear that.
Can I add something in this? Because, you know, it intrigued me also. I was thinking that, you know, when we say I'm going to do the thing that I'm good at, it's like this good at is a result of intelligibility, understanding.
Mhm.
Like we have understood that. But if I do the thing that I love, it has this kind of, you know, affect in it, isn't it? Maybe it's not understandable to anyone. There you don't have a proof of it, a tangible proof. I mean,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
abilities,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
skills.
Yeah.
So it becomes political in that way as well, you know, through the stigma. When I understand something, I give more value, but all the affective world, the emotional world, is not easily understood. So
When I keep going back to Tony, and I realize that how sometimes someone's entire personality can develop, a whole persona can develop uh, around these ways of learning what one is good at. But it's underneath it all, it's a matter of, well, how do you survive? So what helps you survive becomes so dear to us that that is what begins to shape us. And then we can basically take in ethics and ethical values and see virtues. So if I've become someone who is, say, people pleasing, and if a whole personality develops around that, then I may then look for theories and ideas that confirm that way of being and make myself more intelligible. And I may denigrate ideas that stand in opposition to that or change that. And I think that I'm being influenced by ideas, but it's not that I'm shaping my own interaction with a set of theories and ideas that are comforting to me because it validates the way of being that I've already chosen. I mean, Tony's sense of humor, again, I don't think that I've laughed so much in my life other than in that group, in that particular way. And to see him effectively take distance from it was like, wow, what this can actually do is that can change his personality. And I think this is something else that I feel comes back to our practice, that when people's lives change, their sense of self change, they sometimes are not able to continue what they've done. And some of the things that they have done has brought them success and wealth and marriages and children and jobs and so on and so forth. And they say, I can't continue with this because the whole thing is indexed to a personality, a certain way of engaging with the world. And once you see through that, how this has all come together, you're no longer attached to it that much. I don't know if that makes sense, Anna.
Yeah, it does.
Thank you for your very touching representation. And I actually have a question about the care. I'm not sure the care there here referring to what exactly, what does it mean? Can you like
Yeah, no, I think thank you. It's a word that has it's such a platitude and generally used care that but both these words, respect and care, uh, uh, I'll come to your question in just a second, but just want to confirm that the words care and respect are so overused that to bring them into a discussion like this feels like, well, it's kind of like dull and boring and lacking in some kind of an intellectual strength or something. But care very simply means that I it's not that I generally care for you or care for my client or care about this planet, but I care for something concrete. It's like to look after something that is in need of looking after. To care for a client, therefore, in the therapeutic context, is to care about, to empathize with, because that's what we do. I mean, as therapists, we listen, and that's our job, right? But then the listening with care would mean that I care about their experience the way they experience it, right or wrong, is a I think that there are some not very good ways of thinking about one's experience. But I think that to care for someone in a therapeutic context is to allow them the ability to express their own reality the way they perceive it and the way they experience it. So it would mean not attempting to correct it, to put it right, but continuing to care about what happens if they continue along the lines that they are construing their own experience. So it's an engagement where I'm simultaneously upholding their right to have their experience and also encountering them. So I'm not becoming aloof and I'm saying, well, it's your life, baby. You can do whatever the hell you want. It's not that. That is not care, right? I really get what you're doing. I know what you're wanting to do. This is you can do it. That's fine. I think you have every right to do it. That is not what I would call caring. But I think it looks different in different instances because I think therapy is challenging. And one way that it poses a challenge is not by overtly questioning them or challenging their point of view, but it is challenging for people to not meet opposition. So in my own therapy, when I'm talking about my experience and if my therapist says something to me that I feel I have to justify and explain, that is less challenging. Although I'm being challenged, I'm used to meeting that kind of a challenge. But when I'm not having to do that, then it forces me to think further about what I have just said and the implications of it. So it's almost like saying something out in an open, like a mountain valley, and the echo comes back. and then I have to respond to that. So I think that there is something of that double movement that happens in therapy about this movement of care, which is letting someone really have their own experience the way they're having it, and also meeting it. And sometimes it takes the form of asking a question to clarify, but it's coming from a place of being interested rather than a judgment that this is wrong, this is right.
Thank you for your interpreting. I think I still have a long way to go to balance the caring. Thank you.
I think one of the things that Kierkegaard teaches us is that none of us can master this. Yes?
No.
None of us can master this. If we really walk along this path, there are spectacular failures along the way, because no human being is up to the task of fulfilling that ideal, because these are ideals. But I think that I prefer to have ideals that I cannot reach rather than to scale down the ideals that I can hit the mark.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassandra. Would you like to say something? You seem like you liked something. No pressure. Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm sorry. I've been listening as I've been cooking. It's been really, really great, actually. It's like a podcast. But yeah, I think I just really resonated with that sentiment of this is like a task that won't ever be complete. And I think there's something really freeing for me in hearing that. And yeah, I've just been taking all of it in, and I think so often we kind of move away from the concept of love when it comes to the therapy room. So I was really excited to hear you bring that in. And I guess I'm in my third year of training to be a psychotherapist. And I'm curious, how would you say that your concept of how you've understood love in the therapy room has evolved over time? I mean, it's a big question, but any thoughts on that would be appreciated.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question, in the sense that people have been talking about love, and that people in person-centered therapy, that world has been talking about love, and I don't necessarily see eye to eye with different ways of depicting love, and I feel more in so some of Roger's terms, like unconditional positive regard and empathy, I think that those terms are interpretable in different ways, and what I'm doing at the moment is that I'm bringing a Kierkegaardian interpretation of these terms. So I'm saying that the concept of therapeutic love that I'm trying to develop is one which says that unconditional positive regard and empathy are love, provided you see all the other surrounding things about what it means to be a human being. Because if your fundamental presupposition about being human is slightly skewed, then love will mean going in a direction that I would not want to put my hand up to. Right? I don't know if that makes sense, but if you are inclined that way, and your third year of training, what is it? Existential training you're doing?
So I'm at Regents, and I'm in the third year doing the integrative training, but I think one of my big regrets was not doing the existential pathway. So it's really nice to have an opportunity to find things like this. So I'm really grateful for, having the opportunity to just join in a lecture on this and have that kind of part of my thinking stoked, because I've been missing it a lot.
Yeah. So I would encourage you to pick all the theorists that you have studied and make them go to work for you. You know, I think that I love Rogers, but rather than blindly following him, I think that I want to question Rogers. So something of that move may be really interesting. You know, people whose works we like and admire, we either just follow them, or that we engage with them in ways that allows us to make it our own. Did you ever study Rogers in your training?
Yeah, we have. We've covered it, and I think it provides like a really useful sort of foundational understanding. But I mean, what you just said actually resonates for me quite a bit around like, actually, I think being critical of these things is an act of love. I think the more critical I can be, because there's a real engagement then. So yeah, I think what I'm missing lately from the existential stuff is the inspiration that I can find in it. Because I don't know if I see it everywhere all the time in the way that I do when I engage like this. So yeah, that's a challenge I'm up for.
Good. Well, I wish you find something that really catches your imagination and and passion. Yes. If any one of you has questions or afterthoughts or suggestions, as I said, all this is very much work in progress. It always is for me. So you're very welcome to write to me. I'll put my email address here.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Great. Thank you very much, Devang, for today. It was a very interesting presentation and discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for the invitation and this opportunity to run through some very embryonic ideas. Yeah, it's great.
Thought. And thank you everyone for coming. I'm just letting you know that this was our fourth and last for this season existential encounter. We'll be back in the fall, and you'll get our info and information about this. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Okay. Have a
Thank
nice
you.
day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.